Hello, this is Jonathan Lampel with Blender HD, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you something that I think is pretty cool, and that's how to render large-scale smoke in Blender. So, I've got some examples here. If you take a look at this, this is what, generally the results I would kind of get. I would make a smoke sim, render it out, and it looked like this. And, it doesn't really look that good. I lighted it properly and everything, and it just doesn't look so great. And so I thought, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. I think I can make it look a bit thicker. So I went ahead and got this result, which, compared to this, looks a whole lot better. But I thought, it still looks a bit fuzzy around the edges. It doesn't look like it's a big thing of smoke. And it looks big, but it doesn't look huge. So I still had a few tricks, so I thought, let's give it a try. And I came up with this. And this looks awful. Just to be honest, it looks terrible. And you can see that it is a lot thicker. It's, harder around the edges. But there's one thing. It has all these nasty little splotches and it looks really bad. So, I found a way to fix that. And immediately from this, I changed one setting. Just keep that in mind. I changed one setting and got this. Now that's a pretty big difference. This doesn't look perfect. It could, use some more tweaking and materials and such. But to jump from that to that is pretty big, and something I haven't really seen in Blender ever. I've never seen this really done. I think it was something that might have been lost in the documentation somewhere along the way. People forgot about it. I don't know. But I think you'll find this tutorial pretty helpful if you want to create some large-scale smoke, and, let's just jump into it and get started. So, first I'm going to make a, scene. So to do that, I'm just going to take a few shortcuts. If you need an introduction to the smoke sim, there are plenty out there. I'll go through everything, but, if you need to get a refresher on the basics, there's lots of video tutorials, and if those aren't helpful, maybe I'll make one a little bit later if you want. But now I'm just going to assume you know kinda how things work. Okay, so this is going to be my emitter. I want it to be a little bit more round, so I'm just gonna put an edge loop there, put an edge loop there, scale that along the Y, take that one, scale it along the X, and there we go. And instead of going through and setting in all my materials and going into the physics tab, I find that kind of tedious, so I'm just going to hit space and type quick, and you get all these quick effects. So say I wanted quick fur, or I wanted it to explode. I don't like the quick explode because it uses the explode modifier, and the explode modifier doesn't look that good, in my opinion. But for this we want quick smoke. Take that, and if we just play this back, you can see we now have smoke. And the really cool thing is it's applied the basic smoke material here, so we can go ahead and render it out pretty much right away. So it does exactly what it said. It made quick smoke, and it's, really, really handy. So let's just try this out. I'm going to change that to black just for now. If I render it out, we have smoke, and it looks good. Well, it doesn't look good, but you know what I mean. It rendered. So, I'm just going to really quickly change this to a sun. We're going to adjust the lighting a little bit later, but just so we have a better view of things when we render it out. Let's try that. Alright, that's a bit better. Okay, so this little area here is definitely not big enough to work in. It'll be hard to get a good result just from this tiny little box of a domain. So I'm just going to scale this up. Try and scale it up on even multiples. I found if I scale it up times, well, first I'll jump to the beginning. If I scale it up times 2, I don't know what happened there. Scale 2, then it'll work. But if you just go and scale random dimensions, sometimes kind of bugs out on you. So just be sure that that's all good, and then I can kind of want it a little bit bigger, so I'll scale it up 2 more times, and then bring it up a little bit. I don't want this too far, or else it'll, start intersecting the emitter there, so I'll leave it a little bit below. and I'm going to scale it 2 times along the x-axis. So now we have it to be nice and long. I kind of want something, you know, blowing across. So you can do whatever you like, but for this, that's what I'm going to do. And if we play this back, you can see we have smoke and it just rises up. I want it to blow across, so I'm going to add a force field and wind, rotate it so the little arrow is facing that way. And it's not really affecting it too much, so I'll change the strength to say... Oh, looks like I locked my numpad. Okay. Change the strength to 10. Okay, so now it's really blowing. And that looks pretty good. I might change the flow. What you can do is, you know, the strength basically just shows how much it's blowing that way. And it also increases kind of the speed. But if you change the flow, say if I turn that up really high, it kind of creates a drag as well. And that can be really useful for some large scale stuff. But for now, I'll just change it to like 3. And that looks good enough for me. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the domain, and since it's, you know, really low resolution, if we go ahead and render this out, just preview what it looks like. It's really blocky, really obscure, doesn't look that good, basically just because we don't have enough subdivisions. So what I can do is increase up to 64 for now. We'll be increasing it a bit more later, but that'll be good enough just to see how it acts. So, you know, that looks pretty good. One thing that you can play around with is these settings here, the density. Just to go over it real quick. The density affects how fast it rises based on how dense the smoke is. So since this is set to a negative value, the denser the smoke is, it's going to fall, which, you know, makes sense. And then the temperature difference, the higher the temperature, the faster it'll rise. It makes sense because heat rises. And so you can play around with these. They do different things, and you can get some pretty cool effects. But I'm just going to leave it at default for now. Vorticity is something that you really want to be sure is right. If you set it too low, what you're going to get is a really smooth result, which is, you know, really cool for like candles and stuff. And it can be good for different things, but for smoke, doesn't look very good. Basically, it's the amount of rotation in the fluid is what it says. You can set this really high, but that also gives you a not so good result, because you can see that while it's more noisy, and it looks good now, if you turn this up to say 96 or something, I'm going to turn on adaptive domain so it bakes faster. It's more noisy, but it's just a lot of noise and no form. So I don't like it up too high. But if I change it back to 2, I get a pretty good result. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the smoke high resolution. So just make sure the adaptive domain works. It has been a bit buggy for me recently with not rendering quite right. So let me make sure it's rendering okay. You just want to make sure that it's matching the viewport, so which it is, so that's good. Alright. So now with the high resolution, I'm going to turn that on. And with the wavelet, I'll turn this back down to 64 just so you can see what's going on. The strength here just determines the size of the noise, sort of like divisions, but it's actually a bit different because divisions is the amount of voxels, and it directly affects the behavior of the smoke. This does affect the behavior, but it affects the shape. So it doesn't affect the behavior, but it does change the shape quite a bit. So you do want to experiment with this on for sure. And you can see if I render it looks a bit better. But I don't like the noise method up too high because you see if I, change it up to something really big like, actually 4 is high enough, you can see you get a lot of this little noise in there, and it's just, like I said before, it's adding noise in no form, and a lot of the times you'll get these results where you have these straight lines, um, where you'll get like some there, there, there. You can't really see it too much now because I don't have a high enough resolution, but if you go ahead and play with it more, you'll realize that if you set this too high and you don't have enough subdivisions or enough divisions, then you'll get some pretty nasty results. And I don't want to turn it up ridiculously high, so I'm just going to leave it at 1.5, and that'll give us both a smooth result and just a little bit of noise, and it should work out well. Okay, so that looks good enough for me for now. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to up the divisions to 250. And let me play it back just to make sure it acts about the same as it did before. Pretty much. So then I'm going to set that to 250, turn on high resolution, change this to 3. One thing with smoke is you can't really lower this and still get good results. I mean, you just can't unless you're really viewing it from like super far away or something. Then it would be okay. But since I'm doing kind of a close up here, I definitely need high divisions. And if you don't have a fast computer, that's unfortunate, but that's just the way it has to be. So experiment whatever works for you. If I was doing like something super serious, I'd probably set this to like 300 or something like that, and then maybe the divisions even higher. But for now, I want it to be quick, so I will just go ahead and bake this, and I'll pause the recording so you don't have to sit through it. So I'll see you in a second. Oh, one thing I just forgot to mention, if you haven't saved the file yet, the smoke cache is going to be grayed out. So all you need to do is go to File, Save, and then once you save your file, then you'll be able to use that. So I'll see you in a sec. Alright, so now we have our baked smoke. I only went ahead and baked it to 100 frames because this is just an example, so that'll be good enough for now. One thing to note is that I switched to Blender 2.65 because as I was baking, it kept crashing around frame like 35 or so. So it's probably, well, it would be a bug. I haven't quite tracked it down yet, but I switched over to 2.65, which has all of the new smoke simulation options in it, and so baked it out, it works fine, and it looks good. So I went ahead and rendered this, and this is what it looks like with our default quick smoke settings. And it looks okay, but it doesn't look great, and I want it to look a little bit bigger. So one thing that you notice is that if I turn on this view transparent thing, you can see that it's not super thick. Definitely around here and such. I want it to be bigger, but we'll get to that in a second. Alright, so you'll notice that the viewport is really slow. Some of the options are really slow. So what you can do is just turn off Show High Resolution, and that'll make things nice and quick for you, so you don't have to wait lots of time. Okay, so now we get into the good part of rendering smoke, and this is what it looked like with the default options. So just to go over a few quick things here. Important things is that the density scale is something that we're going to want to change, because basically this tells us the scale of the smoke. So I don't know what units it's using necessarily, but you can see if I change this to say 25 and compare it to the first one, it's going to look different. And what it's done is it's changed the relative size of it, so you see here compared to here, this just looks bigger. So you would logically conclude that the higher you set this, the bigger it's going to look. And this is true, up to a point. So Um, Real quick, let me just say something about scattering is if you go ahead and say change this to 1 and change the scattering to 25, it's going to look really similar. And the reason for this is it doesn't do the same thing, but it does look similar. So you can see that the difference here is negligible. Negligible. I can't even say that word, but there's literally no difference. But they do completely different things. The scattering changes the amount of light that hits it and how much it's dispersed throughout it or bounced back, while the density scale changes the multiplication of how dense the object is. So completely different concepts basically do the same thing. Um, I'm just going to set the scattering to 2, really low, and I'm going to set the density scale to 50. And let's go ahead and render that out and see what it looks like. Okay, so you can start to see that it's looking more thick, more like I want it to, but it's not. It looks awful. It has those blotches that we had before, and you can also see that it has these spots. And the way to get rid of these spots is just to change the step size to lower that a little bit. So the lower you set this, the more less patchy it's going to be. So say if you change your scattering to like, actually no, that's not a good example, but sometimes you'll get this really nasty spots in there, and all you need to do is change this to say 0.05 or lower. I've had to set it to like 0.005 once when it was really noisy. It's something that happens depending on what kind of smoke you're making. Okay, so now this is looking a little bit more clear, but we still have those nasty black splotches, and now I'm going to show you exactly what you do to get rid of those. So all you got to do, the entire secret of rendering smoke, all is wrapped up in one option, the light cache. So this is something that's really inconspicuous, and I played around forever with like multiple scattering, which I found doesn't work that well, and different lighting modes, transparencies, ray tracing. Nothing worked. And then I accidentally unchecked this little light cache, and it rendered beautifully. Now, if you just uncheck this completely, and I start rendering this, you'll notice a difference immediately. First of all, there is no cache building. It just it starts rendering right off the bat. Let's see, yep, see it's just starting to render. And as it renders these like small squares at a time. It doesn't render normally at all. Now you can check this and set it to say 300. There's not a huge difference between setting it high and turning it off completely. I found that if you set this to say 300, then it's going to lower your render time a little bit by a minute or so, or even more. But the reason I like to uncheck this is since there is no like caching or anything going on, you can start to see your result immediately. So when I'm testing things out, I like to use this option. However, if I'm just rendering, say, an animation, then I would definitely check the light cache and set it to, say, 300, like I said. And this is also, well, as you can tell, it's a whole lot slower. This is, way slower than when it was 50, but you can start to see it looks a whole lot better. I might want to set the density scale even higher, and I'll do that in a minute once this finishes. One thing to note is that this is pretty much influenced by the step size. So if you uncheck the light cache or set it really high, and you set the step size as really low, it's gonna take an awfully long time to render. Like, I mean, on my computer, I have a fairly fast computer, and it would take, maybe 2 hours to render something if I set this super low. So definitely be careful with that. And I'll just go ahead and stop this here, just because I don't want it to take too long. But you can already tell that the difference between that and that is really big. You can start to see all the little little noise details there, and you don't get this nasty blurred result. Okay, so there's still a few problems with it that I don't necessarily like. One thing is that there are still a few jagged edges. You can't really see it too well, maybe you can in this one, but you get a few of these jagged edges that I was talking about earlier, where it's kind of, you get some lines in there and there. It just doesn't look quite as good. So what you can do is you can change the in the voxel data options in the textures, you can change the interpolation from linear to cubic B-spline, and that's just going to smooth it out. I think I did that earlier. Maybe I was just thinking that, but yeah, that'll really help smooth things out. Alright, so a couple last things. I'm going to turn this on again just so we can have the faster render, and turn this down so we don't get that nasty splotches. So you can see as I render this that one of the reasons it looks bad is because simply we just didn't light it correctly. I mean, it's just flat lighting, it doesn't look that good, and that's another big reason, besides light cache, that maybe your smoke simulation doesn't look so great, is just because you didn't light it correctly. Just like if you didn't light a scene fully, it's not gonna look good. So that's something that's often forgotten, and with smoke, it's just as important as with anything else. So let me go ahead and change the lighting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sun here, and I'll change this to 1.5 just to give it, a fairly bright light. Give it a nice angle. Just place this wherever you would normally put a key light, where you want the highest amount of reflections to be. Then I'm going to take this and duplicate it and turn it this way. And then side view, I'm going to move it down and then just kind of rotate it up just a little bit. So it's kind of simulating some bounce lighting. And I'm going to set this to 0.5. So there we have that. And now I'm going to make a backlight. So I'm going to duplicate this, move it over, and kind of tilt it down a bit more. So now we have a nice backlight. And lastly, since this smoke, it has a lot of little tiny holes and stuff in it, I'm going to take this bounce light and duplicate it in the front. And yes, so it'll start to fill in those little holes. So now if I go ahead and render, it should look better. The smoke is still going to look awful because the light cache is turned on, but all in all, it'll be shaded. It'll just look nicer. So now I can start to see some of the highlights, some of the shadows. It's filling in some of the crevices. Okay, so if we take a look at the two different ones, you can see that even though it's, largely the same, I don't think I changed too many settings in the materials, that it just looks a whole lot better. So, now that we have our lighting, I think we're good to go. One thing that you can do if you want your smoke to be a little bit more thick, you can turn up the intensity, to 2 or something, and you can see that it'll just change that there. I don't like turning it up too high, but it's another trick that you can do. One thing that you can do if you want really thick smoke like this, this is, really, really thick, almost too thick. I turned this up really high, and when I mean really high, I mean 1,000. I set this to 1,000, and I set this to 15. But I don't necessarily want it that high this time, but I do want it fairly high. So I'm going to set this to, let's go 350. So that's pretty big. I'm going to leave this at 2, and I'll turn off the light cache, and I will go ahead and save and render. And yeah, so I will see you guys in a minute when this Alright, so now we have our completely rendered result here. You can see that it took quite a while, about an hour and 13 minutes, and this is on a pretty high step size with a really small render size. It's only half of 1080p, but that's pretty much the basics of creating large-scale smoke in Blender. I didn't go over the actual smoke sim very much. I just set up a really quick thing, and you can see the smoke sim itself doesn't look all that great, but the rendering looks fine. Um, Still, it could use some help, rendering wise, but that's Blender internal. I'm hoping that when Cycles comes around, we can make some really awesome things and make it look even better without the ridiculously high render times. So, if you have multiple computers or just a ridiculously fast computer, if you wanted to make an animation with this, then that would be really cool and I'd love to see it. Um, and if you just make some sort of awesome scene or whatever, or learn something, then that's great. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to like the video, and if you want more tutorials like this or any other tutorials, feel free to subscribe and message or email me to request a tutorial. And yeah, have a good day. See ya.